Oh, we've started. Okay. So we have been going through the minor prophets. And I'll say technically last time we wrapped up Malachi, which is why a few people are kind of confused. However, in this series, we skipped one because we had technically already done it. I think it was the very first book that we did. And about halfway through the series, I felt a touch of regret that we just didn't start from the very beginning. So in order to be completionist, so we can say that we actually covered everything, and we've got slides, look at the wonderful slides. We can go through it in a much greater detail. So we are going to go back and do the very first prophet, the one we should have done at the beginning, which is the book of Jonah. Oh boy, it's a crowd favorite. So we're gonna end on a popular book, not like Malachi, right? Who likes Malachi, aside from pastors who like talking about tithing? So the book, of course, begins with the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. And oh boy, this is wonderful. This is beautiful. We have a direct reference to the person, right, Jonah, and we have some sort of biological, addition. We know who his father is. Particularly why this is important is we have a reference, quite likely, to this Jonah. So back in 2 Kings, in the 15th year of Judah's king Amaziah, son of Joash, Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, became king of Israel in Samaria and reigned 41 years. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight. That's a shocker. He's a king of Israel. He did not turn away from all the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had caused Israel to commit. So keep in mind, there are two Jeroboams. There's Jeroboam the first. He's the one who broke away from the original kingdom. He was given 10 tribes. And then there's Jeroboam the second, no relation. And Jeroboam the second is a very powerful, very wealthy king. We'll talk a little bit about him. This is Jeroboam the second, restored Israel's border from Lebo Hamath as far as the Sea of Arabah, according to the word the Lord, the God of Israel, had spoken through his servant, the prophet Jonah, son of Amittai, from Gath Hepher. So, Jonah is a prophet. He is specifically mentioned in 2 Kings, so we can actually tie our protagonist for this book to a historic reference, which is great. There are not very many prophets we could do this with, which is, again, it really helps us contextualize the book. Here we have a map of Israel, and just for reference, right? I've shown you maps. You should be fairly familiar with it. This shouldn't be a shock. Jerusalem is the yellow in the south. You should kind of know where Jerusalem is. Samaria, which is the northern capital, is the orangish thing in the middle. And then Gath Hepher is in the north. It's green. There's a lot of interesting things about this. For one thing, this makes Jonah one of the few northern prophets that we have named, as well as mentioned. Like most prophets come from the south. Most prophets are from Judah or in the southern tribes. Jonah is from the north, and he is serving, to some extent, a northern king, which is really quite interesting. We just don't have very many examples of that. So he is ministering, prophesying during the time of Jeroboam the second, right? No relation to the first. That puts us somewhere between 790 and 760 BC, all right? You can see where the little green bar is. And I've got a little picture up there so you know it's Jonah. I can show commentaries or whatever, but most people are happy to say that he is ministering sometime between 793 and 753, so we have a 40-year window. I am comfortable and more confident saying that he is probably, the bulk of his ministry would be in the first half to the first third of Jeroboam's reign. And we've already talked about this, but just for a refresher, I know you all remember. But in Amos, which is where we started, we find out that when Amos is ministering in Israel, now Amos is from the south, right? He was raising goats or whatever, raising sheep. And he is sent to the north, and he starts stirring up a lot of problems because they don't like this southern prophet coming and telling the northerners what to do. And he basically says, look, I don't want to be here either, but God told me to come here because you don't got any prophets left. Well, this is still during the time of Jeroboam II. So what's going on with Jonah? Jonah should still be around unless something may have ended his ministry. Maybe he came back and started saying things he wasn't supposed to say. We don't really know. But here is our more official timeline for the 8th century, and you can see we've got Amos ministering the bulk of his kind of towards the end of Jeroboam's reign, somewhere in 760 to 750. And you can see I've moved kind of Jonah between 790, 770. It's a guess, but it seems like it's an educated guess. So, we are now formally and properly starting with Jonah, keeping in mind that we've already covered all the 11. And it's a famous story, you know the story, but we have a prophet who is going to be sent to another country, another people, and give them a message of judgment, right? He is sent to the Assyrian city of Nineveh to, we'll say, give a chance to repent. He doesn't think that or doesn't want that, but we know what's going to happen. We all know this story. Has anyone not heard the story of Jonah? Okay. So, here's our relative timeline, and I'm fairly happy with this. This is just broader because we can't be too exact with very many of these. A few we can, as we know, like Haggai and Zechariah. But Jonah is roughly the first third of the 8th century. Amos and Hosea are going to overlap in the middle of the 8th century, and then Micah and Isaiah will come at the end of the 8th century. So they're all roughly in the same time period. Hosea lived long enough and ministered long enough that he may have overlapped with all of them. Like, he had a very long ministry. So did Isaiah. Here we've got another timeline with all the prophets. Look how pretty they are. Again, we don't know exactly how long Jonah's ministry was. We just know that he was active during the time of Jeroboam II, which is a 40-year window. So other than that, it's hard to be too dogmatic. Not that it really matters, I guess, but we'll talk about that as we go on. So, the book of Jonah, right? And I just couldn't help myself. Our subtitle has to be Whale of a Tale. It's just there. It's just too obvious. I know. We're going to go with the easy way out. So the outline. Just outlines are not always important, but Jonah is unique for a lot of reasons. And we're going to have the story unfold kind of in 4 acts. We've got the storm, which we all know. That's what everyone's familiar with, which is really not the most important part of the book. It's just what we like to talk about. We've got his prayer or lament in the sea creature. We'll talk about what that is. And then you've got the sermon/revival at Nineveh, and finally, God's reflection on Jonah in chapter 4. And they roughly line up with the 4 chapters, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Today, we are going to focus on chapter 1. So, not that we always do this, but there are critical questions. The main one is, did Jonah write his own book? And the answer is, we have absolutely no way of knowing. Jonah's book is different from pretty much all the other 11 minor prophets because it's pretty much entirely narrative. The others are mostly collections of sermons or stories or whatever, however you want to think of them. They're probably things that they either taught or wrote down and have got passed on, maybe by their students or other prophets or whatever. Jonah is mostly narrative. It's a book about Jonah, which raises a lot of interesting questions. Did he write it? We don't know. It doesn't tell us. Could another prophet have written it? Could one of his students have written it? It's all possible. We have no idea. The other really difficult question to answer is, how do we classify this book? Because it's a story about a prophet, and all kinds of things have been proposed. Is it allegory? Is it a novelle? Is it satire? Is it a legend? Is it a parable? No one's really happy. No one really knows how to categorize it. I am going to propose, and as we go through, I'm going to really stick with this, because I think what's going on is we have an ironic hero story. Jonah's story really seems to have the closest resemblance to the Judges. We have a figure who is going in judgment to another city. And we have kind of a cycle like what we see in the stories of the Judges. The problem is, nothing ever really goes right in this story. It seems like everything is kind of upside down. For one thing, Jonah is going to deal with a city that's not even his own. Jonah's not even a hero, he's a prophet. So everything kind of feels, again, upside down, which is why I call it ironic. And if we think of it as a hero story, or as kind of a heroic legend, or in that kind of that genre, something, again, like what we see in the Judges, I think the story is going to be a lot more interesting, a lot more entertaining, and give us some new insights. So as we go through, again, this will all come up. With all that said, right, with all the introduction done, we begin in verse 1, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Now, as I've already alluded to, we have a historical reference to the man Jonah. Right? We know that he's active during the time of Jeroboam II. That gives us not only a chronological framework that we're dealing with, but also a historic context. So what do we know about Jeroboam II? Well, he was a very, very evil king. But he wasn't just an evil king. He was a very powerful king. He was a very wealthy king. Israel experiences something that they had never really experienced before. That is widespread prosperity. Most of the kings were kind of just managing to squeak by. But Jeroboam II, for all of his wickedness and evilness and so on, he was incredibly powerful. And it even says, he restored Israel's border from Lebo Hamath. You can see here on the map. This is a nice little map. It goes all the way up north of Hamath. That's past Damascus. As far as the Sea of Arabah, according to the word of the Lord. He has basically gotten back the territory that Israel had slowly been losing since the time of Solomon. Not only that, but this has all been prophesied according to the word of the Lord by Jonah. So Jonah has been going around preaching prosperity despite Israel's blatant wickedness. That's kind of odd. Why would a prophet do that? Just bear with me on this, but I'm going to make a connection that I just can't help. And now that I've made it, I can't get it out of my head, and now you're going to have it too. Jonah is the Joel Osteen of the Old Testament. It's okay. God's going to bless you. We're going to get back our territory. We're going to be wealthy. God loves us, and, just kind of do your best. That seems to be what Jonah's message is. So, with that in mind, and this is going to get fun. So, verse 2. Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh, and preach against it, because their wickedness has confronted me. So God is now speaking. He's commanding Jonah, get up. And you may think, I don't know, in my head, you've got maybe this pastoral scene. Jonah's lying down on a field or whatever, and God gently says, Jonah, get up and go and do whatever. This is in the military sort of imperative. This is more like a drill sergeant screaming at a disobedient grunt. Get up. So what do we know about Jonah? He's a prophet in the north. He's prophesying during the time of Jeroboam, a very wicked king. He's preaching prosperity despite this historical setting. And our first interaction with the character is not one of great obedience. It's like God, it's like picture someone, some kind of slacker, and he's working in a factory or whatever, and the foreman has to go over and start kicking him, like, get up and do your job. Jonah, right, our very first interaction is that Jonah seems to be a bit of a sluggard, right? He doesn't seem to be particularly motivated. I'm going to ask a question, and we're going to immediately clarify and smooth it over. Could Jonah be a false prophet? Now, I'm going to clarify again what I mean by that. I don't necessarily mean is he a prophet of another god, like Baal or whatever. We know he's a prophet of Yahweh. But even so, God can use other prophets, the most famous of which is going to be Balaam, right? He is literally a false prophet that God uses and then has his prophecy spoken through Balaam. What I'm going to suggest, and I can't get this out of my head because there are things about this story that don't quite add up. Jonah's in the north. He seems to be attached to this very evil king. He's going to have a lot of money, things that most prophets don't have, right? Most prophets are just kind of squeaking by. And God seems to be dealing with Jonah rather harshly. On top of all of that, Jonah is not the most obedient prophet. So the context that I'm suggesting is we know that kings, both in the south and in the north, employed prophets. David employed prophets. David had a very good prophet. He had Gad, who he didn't really listen to because Gad was a good prophet. Instead, David had paid prophets to just kind of tell him what he wanted to hear. I'm thinking mostly of Nathan, right? Nathan, should I build a temple? And Nathan's like, do whatever you want. He's basically paid to be a yes man. So even David had these, right? And then God has to step in and tell Nathan, what are you doing? I didn't tell you to say that. We know that there are these sort of yes men prophets in the north as well. So is it possible that Jonah is basically paid by Jeroboam to speak on Yahweh's behalf and tell Jeroboam what he wants to hear? This raises the question, just how legitimate is Jonah? I don't know. He is called a prophet, and he gives legitimate prophecies. And we know that God is going to use Jonah. But if Jonah is just someone kind of playing prophet or acting like a prophet, then the fact that God is going to call him, and God is going to make him do something, it's like, you want to be my prophet, I'm going to make you be my prophet whether you like it or not. And he is going to drag Jonah on this journey, literally kicking and screaming, which is really, really funny. We're not letting go of this just yet. So with all that in mind, right? So he's commanding Jonah, he's yelling at Jonah, this already disobedient prophet, get up, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it because their wickedness has confronted me. This, to put it in modern perspective, in my mind, would be like God calling out to Joel Osteen and telling Joel Osteen, I want you to go to Russia and talk to Putin for me. I don't think that Joel Osteen would like that. I'm not sure that he would go. I'm not sure what he would do if all of a sudden he heard God's voice legitimately. It would probably send him into a spiral. He might try and run away, kind of like Jonah does. It's a really funny thing to think about. So he is going to send Jonah to Nineveh. Here we have the sort of outline of the heartland of Assyria. And some commentaries, some pastors probably have been like, Nineveh was the capital of Assyria. It will be. It's not yet. So Assyria, over its history, will have 4 capitals. In the south, you've got Ashur, which is the original traditional capital. During this time, so 9th and 8th century, you have Kalhu. It's the capital. It's the capital right now. Later, the capital is moved to Dur-Sharrukin under Sargon II. It's just a military fortress that he decides to kind of move the government to for just ease of access. And then eventually it will move to Nineveh. But even so, Nineveh is very much the economic center of Assyria. It is the beating heart of the nation. It's like New York City for us today, perhaps. It's where all the culture is. It's where all the wealth is. It's a very powerful, very wealthy city. So the fact that God is drawing attention to Nineveh shouldn't be all that shocking. However, our disobedient prophet, Jonah, got up to flee to Tarshish. So he should be going north, and instead, so here we've got our map again. You've got Jerusalem to the south, you've got Samaria to the north, and he decides to flee from the Lord's presence. That's not a good sign. And he goes to Joppa. He's going down to Joppa. So Joppa is the blue thing on the coast, right? So it's a port city. So he should be going to Nineveh. That's where the blue to the northeast is. Instead, he's going to the red dot to the west. He's going down. We're going to get to that. He went down to Joppa. Now that is we're going to get to this in more detail. But he is going down. Down in the sense he's going south, but also quite literally, right? He's going down to the coast. Samaria is up in the mountains. So he is literally going down to the coast to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So during this period, we are in the 8th century, there's a fairly elaborate merchant network that's emerged. And so there is trading all over the Mediterranean. We know that there's trading all over northern Egypt, there's trading in the Greek islands, there's trading all the way to Spain. We have no idea where Tarshish is. We just don't know. The accepted position is that he basically went to these sailors and said, "What's the last stop?" And they said Tarshish. Jonah himself may have no idea where Tarshish is. He just said, "Take me to the last stop." We know that the trading network goes as far as Spain. So the assumption is he's heading to Spain. Is it Spain? We don't know. Does it matter? Not really. He's getting on a boat and he is going west, right? The exact opposite direction he's supposed to be going. So you see this, and just wherever the boats stop, that's where he's going. He paid the fare. And this particular sentence or phrase gets a lot of scholars frustrated because this is not a cruise ship. This is not a ship that really takes passengers. They're not really equipped for that. These are cargo vessels, right? So he's talking to the sailors. He goes, "I want to, get a ticket to go to wherever the last stop is." And they would have said no. There's just no way. We don't do that sort of thing. And he basically says, "How much to take me as cargo? I'm just going to pay you to take me." And the assumption seems to be, and I think most scholars are probably right, this would have been an astronomical price. Because this is a cargo ship, right? They're sitting around waiting for the cargo. They have to make deals with the merchants, make arrangements, and so on, and he just wants to go. Let's just go now, and just name your price. For those who have seen the movie Home Alone, I can't get this moment out of my mind or comparing it when the mother first realizes that her kid is missing. And she starts arguing with the ticket lady in Paris. And she's like, "I need to go back to America." And they're like, "We're booked. It's Christmas." And she finally says, "How much to just charter a private plane over Christmas?" Now, this poor ticket lady is like, "We don't do that. I can't help you." But let's just stop and think about that. She wanted to charter a private plane over Christmas. This would have been an astronomical price. It makes you really wonder how wealthy this family was. Like, people talk about the mansion and going to Paris and whatever. Like, she wants to charter a private plane back to New York. That's a crazy thing to ask. Again, over Christmas. And that's kind of what Jonah's doing right here. He's going to these merchants, he's going to these sailors and saying, "I want you to take me as a passenger." Like, we don't do that. We're not going to do that. He goes, "Okay, how much money is it going to take for you to say yes?" This brings us back to the question of how on earth would Jonah afford this? This is crazy. You think about most of the prophets. You think of Elijah. You think of Amos. The prophets are not wealthy. You don't go into, I say this generally speaking, but in the back of my mind, you generally don't go into ministry looking to get rich. And that's kind of always been the case. You got Elijah, who is wearing old clothes. He probably smelled a lot. He spent a summer eating bird droppings. That's in the Bible. That's literally in the Bible. Being a prophet was not really a pleasant experience most of the time. And yet, here's Jonah basically bribing these sailors. And it's funny because commentaries will scratch their head, you can almost see them scratching their head going, "Where did he get the money?" One commentary I actually looked at said he had to have gone back home and sold all of his possessions to get, to put together enough. But even then, really, I've toyed with the idea, and I kind of like the idea. If he is working for Jeroboam II, if he's a court prophet to possibly the most wealthy king Israel has had since Solomon himself, that might explain where he got the money. He might have left Samaria with a big bag of gold for travel expenses, right? He is going to get away from God. And we know he's not obedient. He's willing to do things, a little underhanded. But regardless, he has the money, and he has enough to bribe these sailors from asking and keep them from asking any questions and just however far they're going to go. And obviously they said yes. So the rest of verse 3, he paid the fare, went down into it, that is the boat, to go with them to Tarshish from the Lord's presence. Then the Lord hurled a violent wind on the sea. And I do like this verse. I like the phrasing of it because it wants us to know. And you do kind of get the picture. I know it's comical, but you get the idea of like God winding up his arm and throwing the wind. Like that's in the Hebrew, which is just really kind of funny. This storm that's going to hit them is not a normal storm. This is clearly supernatural, and the text wants us to know God himself caused this storm. I know we only care about one, and I don't know, you should get your money back on some sermons. But in the book of Jonah, there's actually 4 miracles that are specifically stated. We've got the storm itself. Everything about the storm is supernatural. Everything is caused by God. It's arranged by God. We get the sea creature, whatever that is. We'll talk about that later. We're going to get the magic plant. That comes later. And we get the bug, which eats said plant. Honestly, I'm more amazed by the bug that ate the magic plant than I am the sea creature that swallowed Jonah. How did this bug eat the plant in one night? I don't know. But we always talk about the sea creature, as if the idea of a whale or whatever swallowing a human is so novel, no one would believe it. There are plenty of sea creatures large enough to swallow humans. Like, that is not the craziest thing in the Bible. Yet, people love to make fun of Jonah for it. Again, I have more interest in the bug than the sea creature, but that's just me. So the Lord hurled the violent wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose on the sea that the ship threatened to break apart. Now, I know, everyone wants to know, they want the most literal translation you can get, whatever that is. No, you don't. You really don't. If you really wanted to know what was in the Bible, you just learn Greek and Hebrew, but that takes work, and I know who wants to work for it. We have one of the most bizarre phrases in the entirety of the Bible right here. So, God himself has wound up his arm, he threw the wind, and now this miraculous, violent storm has appeared, this supernatural storm that even these sailors are going to be afraid of. We'll get to that. And then we get this phrase. In the Hebrew, it literally says, the ship thought to itself, I'm going to drown. We have a self-aware boat in the Bible. I am not making that up. Now, is the boat supernatural? I don't think so. Is the boat actually self-aware? Like this is some kind of Pixar movie where inanimate objects magically come to life, like cars or whatever. No, I don't think the boat is actually alive. But it is funny that the boat is self-referential and self-aware. Why is it? And I love the pun. You're just going to have to go with me on this. This is a big fish story, right? This is being told by a sailor. And so you ask a sailor, right? He's telling his stories or whatever. He goes, I was in this storm, right? And it was the worst storm imaginable. And then you ask the question, how bad was the storm? And he goes, it was so bad, even the ship was worried. That is literally what's in the Bible, and it's great. The Bible is wonderful. Learn Hebrew and Greek. So, this is going to bring us to a point, and I think that this is worth noting. So it says, right, a violent storm arose on the sea. Now, part of what's interesting about Jonah is we are going to get different perspectives. We're going to get Jonah's perspective. He's an Israelite. He believes in Yahweh, a monotheist, and all that. We're also going to get perspectives from pagans, right? Okay, we're going to interact with pagans on this. And so the sea, right, has become violent. Not only do we have a self-aware boat, a self-referential boat, but we also have the sea in personified language. Now, in my opinion, why this is interesting, as opposed to just like natural, like the sea is just a natural body of water. My assumption is we're getting this from the pagan perspective. This is how the pagans are perceiving what's going on. Yam, which is not a god. That's not really the right way to think of it. Yam is the sea itself. Yam has awakened. Yam is tossing and turning and raging. This is Yam. Yam is the sea itself. I love this picture. This is from American Tale. It's as though the sea has come to life. Now, in ancient mythology or whatever, you may be thinking of oceanic gods like Neptune or Poseidon or whatever. You have sort of humanoid figures that have power or authority over the sea. That is not how these sailors are thinking. They are thinking of the sea itself as an entity. The sea itself is raging against them. They are fighting this monster. They imagine themselves as though they are traveling along the back of a sea creature. Right? Again, Yam is an entity unto itself. And Yam is not a particularly pleasant creature. Yam is an evil creature. And you generally want to make sure that Yam is quiet or asleep or whatever. You don't want to disturb Yam, because when Yam gets upset, bad things happen. We're going to get to that more later. But Yam is awake, Yam is raging, and the sailors know it. Verse 5, the sailors were afraid, right? They're afraid of Yam, because Yam is mad. And so each cries out to his god. So we get to the question of who exactly are these sailors? They are not Israelites. The Israelites are smart enough to stay away from the ocean, because the ocean is no good. We've got kind of three options. It's possible that these are Philistine sailors, maybe coming out of the Philistine ports. We know that they're sailors. We know they have boats. If they're Philistines, then they might be crying out to Dagon. They've got their own Philistine gods. It's possible they're Greeks, that they're Greek merchants who have come to the Israelite coast to do trades, and they're going back that way. They believe in gods like Zeus, Neptune, that sort of thing. It's also possible that they are Phoenicians. Phoenicians come from the kind of northern Levant area. They would be Middle Eastern. They probably worship Baal. We don't really know. I think most scholars are happy to just assume they're Phoenicians, but again, we don't really know. There are cultures that are sailing the Mediterranean and they're doing trades and so on. The point is, they're all pagans. They don't believe in Yahweh. They are not monotheists. And as we saw, right, they're each crying out to their gods, because this is an inherent problem within polytheism, right? If you believe that there's any and every possible god, then when something goes wrong, it's because you've angered one of the gods. So you now need to figure out which god is mad. You got to figure out who did the thing, and you got to figure out which god is angry, because you got to appease that god. It's a whole thing, right? It's crazy and it's very complicated. Without going too far down the rabbit trail, this is the very nature of Greek tragedies, where, because if you believe in many gods, right, pretty much anything you do will most likely make one god happy and one god angry. So how do you go through life, to the best of your ability, not angering all the gods? Because chances are you're going to offend at least one of them. So the sailors are out on the sea, and someone has upset Yam. And they don't know who, and they don't know what they need to do to appease the sea god, the sea monster, before the boat itself breaks up and they drown. So the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his god. They threw the ship's cargo into the sea to frighten the load. They're afraid. They're rightly afraid, right? This is a supernatural storm. They understand this. This is not a normal storm. These are merchant sailors who go up and down, back and forth across the Mediterranean. They've done this their whole lives. They have been through everything. They have seen everything. They know a storm they know what storms are. This storm is scaring these sailors. They are not panicking. The first thing they're doing is they're trying to figure out what went wrong. And within their worldview, it's perfectly rational to assume that someone has upset a god. As we know from the story, that's true. The storm is supernatural. A god is angry. They don't know which one because they're polytheists and they're just kind of going down the roster. It's just kind of funny to think about it. You have like this long roster of gods. Okay, is it Zeus? Is it Baal? Is it Marduk? Is it, you have to like pray to each one, hoping that you get the right one before the ship sinks. They then start to throw out what cargo they had. Again, they're making the ship lighter, hoping that it will prolong it from sinking. These are rather rational things to do. They're not panicking. They're afraid, but they're not going completely crazy on this. I like that it says that they cried out to the gods first because in their mind, that's the first thing you do, right? Obviously, that's the most likely culprit. A god caused the storm. Again, they're not wrong. These pagan sailors. Meanwhile, I like this picture. Jonah had gone down to the lowest part of the vessel and had stretched out and fallen into a deep sleep. So the sailors are up top, fighting for their lives, right? Throwing cargo overboard, battening down the hatches or whatever. They're trying to keep the ship afloat, and Jonah is just asleep in the lower hold. And it does talk about a lower hold. So this is a multi-level ship, right? This is a fairly large sailing vessel. This is not a tiny little sailing boat or whatever. This is a merchant ship. Verse 6. The captain, in the Hebrew, is actually the rope master, but everyone assumes we're just talking about the captain, the master of the ship, the master of the sailors, approached him and said, "What are you doing, sound asleep? Get up." And this, at the end, this phrase, is the exact same phrase that God had used at the beginning of the book. I can't imagine what went through Jonah's head. He's asleep, and you got this captain, kicking him awake and screaming into his face, "Get up!" The very thing God yelled at him at the beginning of the book. It's almost like someone is trying to get a message to Jonah. He needs to get up. And as someone kind of blurted out, as we've seen, God told Jonah to get up, to go up to Nineveh. He wants Jonah to go in a certain direction. And Jonah, in his cleverness, not really clever, has decided to go down. I mean, we could just stop here and just make this whole thing about, God wants you to go one way and you go the other way and whatever. We're not going to do that, but obviously the connection is kind of there. He went down to Joppa. He went down to the ship. He went into the lowest part of the vessel. And it says over and over again, he is fleeing from the presence of the Lord. He is doing this geographically, right? He is going from the north to the south, from the mountains to the coast. He is doing this physically. He is going down into the boat. He is literally as far down as he can possibly be. He is in the lower hold of a boat. He cannot go down any deeper. Our irony is going to be, God's going to take him deeper. It's like, you want to go down, I'll take you down. Be careful what you ask for, because God will often give it to you. But then, and this is just part of the Hebrew, and this is one of my favorite turns of phrase, he falls. Fall also has kind of a downward trajectory, right? You fall down. He falls into a deep sleep. And the word for go down is yarad. The word for sleep is yerdam. And you can kind of hear yarad, yerdam. They have the same letters. It's just sleep has the letter M on it. It has to be a play on words. And if you see it in the Hebrew, the letters are unmistakable. It's almost like he has gone down into his dreams. It's like he literally got physically as far down as he possibly could. And when he couldn't go any further, he is going to descend into sleep. Like this is his last hope to get away from God. My mother had a tendency, not that any of you did this, I'm sure, or have ever done this, but if she was having a particularly rough day, the only thing she would want to do is go take a nap. As if by getting into her bed, by putting her cover over her, and by going to sleep, the problems of the world could just not hurt her. I mean, problems don't really work that way, but she would do this. I'm not saying it was a healthy habit, but it was one of her habits. I don't think anyone here has ever done that, right? You've just thought, I've had enough problems for today, I'm going to go sleep. There are people in the Bible who do this. Elijah does this. Jonah, as his last effort to get away from God, has fled into his dreams. Oh boy. So the sailor, right, the master of the rope, the captain, has kicked him awake, has yelled at him, and then says, "Call to your God. Maybe this God will consider us and we won't perish." They've tried everything else, right? The sailors have done their best to keep the ship afloat. They've all called out to their gods. Nothing is working. And so the last thing is to get this, stowaway. He's not really a stowaway. He's paid for this passenger to call his God. Maybe this will help. Again, it's fascinating in this book because we have Jonah, God's prophet, and he's interacting with all of these pagans. And as we're going to find out, the pagans are usually more right than Jonah is. Not only that, but these pagans, these good-for-nothing, dirty, rotten pagans, have better theology than Jonah does. Which I'm not really quite sure what to do with that. So the pagans, right, they're right. The storm is supernatural. A God caused the storm. They don't know which one, but they know a God caused it. And they know, it's like deep down they know, the only way to get out of the situation is to figure out which God did it and ask the God to please knock it out. They just don't know which God. They're not wrong. The sailors are right. Verse 7. "Come on," the sailors said to each other, "let's cast lots." Did Jonah even bother? Did he call out to Yahweh? Did he pray to Yahweh? Well, it doesn't say he did. The sailors are now in their last-ditch effort are going to cast lots. "Then we'll know who is to blame for this trouble we're in." So they cast lots, and the lot singled out Jonah. God has a sense of humor. It is a beautiful sense of humor. You're just not going to convince me otherwise. God was laughing the entire way through this. He knew what he was going to do to Jonah. He knew what was going to happen, and he knew they were going to throw lots. And he knew that this lot was going to fall on Jonah. He was absolutely laughing when this happened. I can't even imagine the dismay when it fell and it was Jonah. I don't know if they pulled straws or whatever, but they did something, and it came to Jonah. Now, keep in mind that we don't have to read the whole thing, but divination is outlawed in Israel. You're not supposed to take part in divination, unless it is sanctioned divination. So what exactly is unsanctioned divination versus sanctioned divination? I don't really know. We don't really get a clear explanation for what is wrong and what is good. We know, for example, that you have the Urim and the Thummim, which is technically divination. They involve stones, and somehow you ask God a question, you got the stones, you throw the stones, and somehow the high priest gets an answer. Aaron uses them, Abijah uses them, a bunch of priests use them. It is technically divination, but it's sanctioned. You're allowed to do this. And of course, we know that there are various ways to ask God questions. The priests can ask God questions, again, with like the Urim and the Thummim. The prophets can ask God questions, and the prophets will even use various forms of divination to get answers. What gives them the right to do it, and what allows them to decide what is okay and what's not, we don't really know. And then, of course, there's oracles. I'll use the term oracle, but they're the dreamers, right? There's Joseph, there's Daniel. They're not really priests, and they're not really prophets, but they still have the ability to go and ask God questions, usually through dreams, right? Daniel can just ask God questions, and God will tell him. Technically, Daniel is never really called a prophet, even though we kind of lump him with the prophets and we treat him like one. But, so you're allowed to do this. You would think, at least I would assume, that lots fall outside of divination, or that you're not allowed to do that. But of course, there's Proverbs 16:33. The lot is cast into the lap, and its every decision is from the Lord. Keep that in mind the next time you go to Vegas. So lot casting. Are you allowed to do this for divination? I'm kind of hesitant to say yes, but we've got a lot of examples. So Joshua in 1 Samuel, obviously Jonah. In Matthew, there's mentioning of lot casting. And then, of course, in Acts, they cast lots to decide who's going to replace Judas. So I don't really know. It seems like at times it's not allowed, at other times it is allowed. I don't really know. I'm going to give the sailors a bit of leeway because they don't know any better. They're just dumb pagans. They're just doing what they do. Jonah should know better. And again, God will use whatever he has to get his, to accomplish his goal. So he's going to divinely inspire these pagan, lot casting to get his answer, which is really funny. So then in verse 8, Then they said to Jonah, right, the sailors to Jonah, "Tell us who is to blame for this trouble we're in. What is your business and where are you from? What is your country and what people are you from?" I think you can kind of imagine that. I think you can kind of picture in your mind, they're just yelling questions at him, right, at this point. The storm is raging, the ship is sinking, they're all agitated, and they now have singled out Jonah. They know he is the one to blame. And we're in on the joke because we know he is the one to blame, right? And so they're just yelling questions because they want to know what happened. They're trying to figure out what went wrong. What did you do, right? But these questions I'm going to kind of summarize as the real thing is, who are you? That's what they really want to know. Like, who are you that has gotten this level of attention from a God? Because this is not normal. Most people, you would hope, can get by with life without a God taking this level of notice. Usually, you don't want God to pay this much attention to you. You don't want to be Job, right? Poor Job. I was in Job at another church this morning. And even Job's like, "God, who am I that you would notice me?" And you know he's just saying this in desperation. Like, please, just leave me alone. So God has clearly taken notice of Jonah. And the sailors want to know why. I love it because this very much evokes the scene in Alice in Wonderland, right? When the caterpillar asks little Alice, "Who are you?" And then Alice doesn't really know how to answer the question because it's a very obtuse sort of question. "Who are you?" "Well, I'm Jonah." "We didn't ask your name, we asked, who are you?" "Well, I'm a prophet." "We didn't ask what your job is, we asked, who are you?" Right? You can see that this gets really obscure. But to give Jonah credit, his answer is brilliant. He gives a very, very good answer. So in this translation, and I'm not really happy with any translation, but in verse 9, he answered them, "I'm a Hebrew. I worship Yahweh, the God of the heavens, who made the sea and the dry land." Now, I am convinced, and I'm kind of alone in this, that his answer has a touch of poetry to it. There's a symmetry to it that no translation really conveys. So this is what he says literally in Hebrew. "A Hebrew I am, and Yahweh, the God of heaven and earth, I fear. I am a fearer of." This is fascinating to me because there are two parts to this answer, right? When it comes to him, he says two things. I'm a Hebrew and I'm a fearer. This is his answer. And they're both, they sandwich Yahweh. Who is Yahweh? And part of what makes this so fascinating to me is when we talk about identities. Right? Who is Jonah? There's a lot of ways he could have answered this, right? He could have said, "I'm Jonah." He could have said, "I'm the son of Amittai." He could have said, "I'm from Israel." He could have said, "I work for Jeroboam." There's a lot of ways he could have answered this. He says, first and foremost, "I'm a Hebrew." That is an ethnic designation. That is almost entirely used in relation to Abraham, the original Hebrew. He is basically telling these pagan sailors who have no idea who or what he is, he says, "I am a child of Abraham." He doesn't say, "I'm an Israelite." He could have. He says, he's basically saying, "I'm a child of Abraham." And then the next part of the answer is, "I fear Yahweh." Now, he's not very obedient in that, which is why I don't think when he says fear, he literally means I serve Yahweh in a literal sense. I think what he means is that I am part of this faith. So his answer is kind of two-pronged. He is a child of Abraham, and he is of the faith of Yahweh. This tells me so much. For one thing, in his mind, in this point in Israel's history, he understands that these are not the same thing. He knows that. He knows you can be descended from Abraham and not believe in Yahweh, obviously. There are people in Israel who are pagans, who serve Baal or Molech or whoever. And also, he brings no attention to his nationality. He doesn't mention Israel. He doesn't mention Judah. He doesn't mention any of those, because those don't matter. What matters here in answering who he is and what he's doing is his ethnic heritage in Abraham and his religious identity. And in all of this, he says Yahweh, and he's going to qualify who Yahweh is, the God of heaven and earth. This very much evokes Genesis. And I think, as we'll see, Jonah seems to have a fair amount of familiarity with Genesis. For one thing, by saying Hebrew, we immediately should think of Abraham, who's from Genesis, right? And by talking about the one who made the heavens and the earth, that just comes like right out of Genesis 1, right? This should be rather shocking to these sailors, right? These sailors are pagan, they're polytheistic. And their mindset, right? For one thing, in a pagan mindset, the world was not created. The world is eternally existent. And the universe is basically composed of two types of gods. You have the gods of order, who make things. We generally like them. And then there are the gods of chaos, who like to destroy things. And these gods are eternally at war with each other. Now, the reason why the storm isn't really a god. The sea is just this manifestation of the water itself. But the reason why it's raging is because obviously one of these gods got upset and has caused the storm to happen, right? These are just these pagan mindset. And Jonah basically says, I serve a God that I believe created everything. This does not compute with these pagan sailors. This is a completely different framework, right? This is not polytheistic. And the very idea of one God who rules heaven and earth, that in itself is crazy. But to say that this one God made the heavens and the earth, that's also crazy. This is far beyond the conception of these poor sailors. This is not how things work. Verse 10. This is a great verse. Oh man, there's so many great verses. Then the men were even more afraid and said to him, what is this you've done? Now, bear in mind these poor sailors. If Jonah really believed this, and think about this from the sailor's perspective. If Jonah really believed one God made everything, why on earth would you try to run from him? What was Jonah thinking? Again, Jonah is not the smartest prophet. Why did you do this? I don't think the sailors believe him. I think the sailors are just more amazed that he would try this. If you believe this, why would you run? That's a really dumb thing to do. And not only that, but you've roped us into this. The men knew he was fleeing from the Lord's presence because he had told them. Now, this is an interesting little addendum. What exactly? Because it seems like they're really shocked. So he may have mentioned, oh yeah, I'm fleeing from my God or whatever. And they probably just didn't think about it. And they probably didn't really acknowledge who exactly he's running away from. They don't know who Yahweh is. They don't care who Yahweh is. Now they care. And now they're concerned. What did you do? They probably thought, okay, he's serving some local, desert god, and he's getting away from him, and that's fine, whatever. This God has left his home in Israel, again, in the pagan mindset, right? He has left his home in Israel and has followed him all the way out into the Mediterranean. Gods usually don't do this, in pagan mindsets. Gods are usually, they like being where they are. They like, laying around in their temples. They like being served. They're kind of lazy. They don't really like doing a whole lot. When they do stuff, it's usually a big deal. But for the most part, gods tend to be rather lazy, kind of like humans. This God is not lazy. This God did not stay in his home. He didn't stay in Israel. And the sailors are not happy about any of this. Again, this is a very strong contrast between the activities and beliefs and worldview of pagans, which these sailors are, and monotheists. Jonah at least pretends to be. He professes that he believes in this one God. And he's not really acting like a very good monotheist. We'll go to verse 11. So they said to him, what should we do to calm the sea that's against us? For the sea, right, Yam, I think that's what I did. I think I moved it wrong. So Yam, right, is getting worse. Yam is literally raging. The raging has gotten worse. We thought it was bad before, right, when the ship thought it was going to sink. But as they've been talking, as all this has been happening, the sea is getting increasingly worse. The sailors were already worried. right? And things are getting worse. Verse 12, he answered them, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea so it may quiet down for you. For I know that I'm to blame for this violent storm that is against you." Who doesn't love a human sacrifice? Just throw me into the sea. That's going to solve everything. And you would think that these pagan sailors, right? I mean, these pagan sailors, right? They're pagans. They dance around the flame naked. They do human sacrifices, right? This is nothing new. This isn't going to bother them. Yeah, they'll just throw them into the sea. No big deal, right? They do human sacrifices. They sacrifice their babies to Molech. And it's not like anywhere in the Bible God ever demands a human sacrifice. Usually, no one said anything. We obviously have the Isaac story. Usually, we categorize ethics as a progression, right? We start with the pagans, then we go through polytheism, and then henotheism, and finally monotheism. And we generally think that ethics progress or get more complex and usually more fine-tuned as we go from pagan to monotheistic. The point is, these pagans, and I think most of us would just assume, they don't believe in ethics. They just do whatever, right? They believe in their gods, and they're doing all kinds of evil things. And so when Jonah says, yeah, just throw me into the sea, they'll be, okay, yeah, we're on board with that. We have no loyalty to you. We don't believe in your God. If you want to go into the sea, fine. We'll throw you in ourselves. Verse 13, nevertheless, the men rowed hard. These pagan sailors, these no good, Baal-worshipping heathens, they don't want to kill Jonah. The pagans in this story come across better than Jonah, which is just fantastic. They rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they couldn't because the sea was raging even more. Like, you keep thinking it can't get any worse, right? You keep thinking Yam can't get more angry, right? We have long passed the point of things getting bad. Like, you keep thinking, when is this boat just finally going to give up? The boat has not given up yet. So why don't they just kill Jonah? Is it really that these sailors have gotten so attached to Jonah? He's just one of them. They like Jonah. No, I don't think so. I think that they're all pretty much on the verge of strangling him themselves. It probably really does come down to the same reason why David didn't kill Saul. And that is, there's just kind of this universal rule in the ancient world. You don't kill anointed people. Now, the reason why, obviously for sailors, these pagan sailors, they're polytheists. And they know that this storm is caused by some god who's gotten mad. And now they found out that Jonah is a prophet of this god that they think did it. Here's the thing, right? Because the anointed we can kind of categorize. You've got priests, right, who serve the gods. You've got the prophets who speak for the gods, and then you have kings who are empowered by the gods, right? They're all part of the anointed. This is even in the Bible. I'm not making this up, right? Generally speaking, you don't want to kill these guys. The only reason why you might kill them is if the God they're serving isn't real, like Elijah killing all the prophets of Baal. Elijah isn't worried that Baal's going to get revenge, right? He doesn't believe in Baal. But what happens if you're a polytheist and you're just everything goes, right? You believe in all the gods. Well, when Jonah says, I serve this God, you don't know what's going to happen. And I think the sailors are pretty close to believing in Yahweh at this point. And what's going to happen even if God says, I want you to throw Jonah into the sea? In their mind, this is a sacrifice, right? They're going to kill Jonah because there's nowhere for him to go. So what's going to happen if they throw this prophet into the sea, and Yahweh, who wants this to happen, is going to turn around and say, why'd you do that? He might still sink the boat for doing what he asked them to do. Again, these are pagans. They don't know what's going to happen. And this is the very nature of sort of ancient tragedies, where God sometimes seemed to make contradictory requests. The most famous of which is when God asks Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. God asks him to do it, but if Abraham is reflecting on it, God generally is against human sacrifice. So what do? Do you go through with it and kill your kid because God asked him to do it, or do you go, God, you don't want this? This violates everything you stand for. And so you don't do it because that you believe that that really follows the spirit of the law. What do you do? I mean, Abraham, it seemed like he was going to go through with it. So these poor sailors, they don't know what to do. And they're genuinely concerned. So verse 14. So they called out to the Lord. These pagan sailors. They are praying to Yahweh. Oh, man. It's glorious. Please, Yahweh, don't let us perish because of this man's life. And don't charge us with innocent blood, for you, Yahweh, have done as you have pleased. We are going to do what you asked. They are praying to Yahweh, a God that they do not believe in, a God they do not recognize, and they are still praying because, they're in the foxhole. And they are going to throw Jonah, and they are saying, once he's in the water and he's dead, it's not our fault, right? We're doing what you have asked us to do, and do not blame us for murdering this innocent man. I mean, is Jonah really innocent? Not really, but we get the idea, right? They don't want God, after this is over, to be like, hey, you shouldn't have done that. They don't know what else to do. So verse 15. They picked up Jonah and threw him into the sea, and the sea stopped. Not calmed down, not slowed down. The sea stopped raging. It really is like, in one moment, you got this huge storm, everything's crazy, the boat is sinking, and then the very next second, it's just calm. Water normally doesn't act this way. So we had the beginning of the storm, which we've already accepted as supernatural, even the sailors have accepted that, and then we have the ending of the storm as also supernatural. I've heard it expressed, and I think it's probably right, that there are what have been classified as the three great miracles in the Bible. You have the parting of the Red Sea under Moses, you have the fire on Mount Carmel with Elijah, and then you have the storm in Jonah. Now, of the three, one is not like the others. Because in the first two, you have God acting through human conduits, right? Moses is the one who parts the sea, right? He raises the staff. You've seen the movie. Elijah is the one who calls down the fire. We all know it's God doing it, but it is a human that is enacting the miracle. With the sea, what has Jonah done? He's done nothing. He did not cause the storm, and he did not stop the storm. It is on his behalf that the storm happened, but he is pretty much useless in the story. So, and I've heard this point made, and I think it's a good point. So you have the three great miracles. Two of the three are done through humans, right? Only one of the three was not done from a human or with a human. In fact, it was done kind of against a human. It's probably because when another figure appears and decides to recreate one of the great miracles, he chooses to do the one that no human has ever done. Of course, I'm talking about Jesus, right? When he calms the storm, he does the miracle that no human ever did. Right? He doesn't just part the sea, because if he parted the sea, well, he's just like Moses. If he calls down fire, well, he's just like Elijah. He doesn't want to be compared to anybody. He wants to do the one thing that no one else can do. Jonah didn't calm the sea. Jonah did nothing. He is in the water. He is useless. He's as good as dead. God calmed the storm, and we recognize that. The sailors recognize that, right? No human caused the sea to stop doing it. We can talk more about Jesus, but we're running out of time. Verse 16. The men feared even more. And I love this progression. I really do. So they begin by fearing the storm, right? They fear Yam. They fear the sea monster thing. And then they find out that, a God has caused the storm. And then they get even more afraid. And then, as it progresses and as they're finding more about Jonah in verse 10, they're even more afraid. Like you keep thinking they can't get more afraid. And then after the storm is over, after the threat has passed, they're even more afraid. And I absolutely love this because these sailors, these pagan sailors who don't know anything, they're dumb, whatever, who have technically not been wrong in this entire story. They've gotten everything right. Bravo to these sailors. They are more afraid of the God who calmed the storm than the God who caused the storm. Because any God can cause it, can kick up dust. Any God can rouse the sea. It's not that hard. It's easy to break things. It's really hard to fix them. And this God calmed the water, something that no God, and because these are sailors, right? They have spent their whole lives on the water. Water doesn't behave this way. The storm doesn't behave this way. Yam doesn't behave this way. No one can just stop the sea. And this God stopped the sea. So this brings us to, because as we went through the 11 minor prophets, and we talked about kind of the main themes of each one. But Jonah, as kind of our prologue, because it's a narrative and it's very different from all the others, we have the theme of Jonah. As this is going to go through the whole book. The theme really is just judgment, divine judgment. And what exactly is judgment? Because, and I've experienced this many times, you say judgment and people immediately think of, spankings. They think of punishment. When God comes in judgment, he comes to just punish. And that's not really true. That's a very oversimplification. The sailors, even Jonah, have experienced the judgment of God. And this really isn't punishment, right? I mean, this was a terrifying experience. Obviously, Jonah's been disobedient. But if, as I'll say and I'll say again, if God just wanted to punish Jonah, he didn't need to go through all of this. If he wanted to just kill Jonah, he could have killed Jonah. This is a problem that Job is going to, he ponders over and over again. Like, if God is really this mad at me, just kill me, right? Don't put me through all of this. Clearly, there's a reason for this. There's a reason for the madness. And as we go through, because we're going to go through this for the next 2 weeks, we're going to have 3 points, because of course we do. My first point is judgment is revelation. When God takes the time to bring judgment, specifically divine judgment, he is revealing something. He is trying to get something across. And we might think that he's trying to beat sense into Jonah. Jonah's in the water. What does he know? He has revealed himself to these sailors, right? He revealed himself in the storm, and he revealed himself in the calm. And so then it's beholden on the audience, right, the ones who've experienced the judgment, to react. So now, because again, Jonah's in the water, we don't care about him. He's away. What do the sailors do? These poor, paganistic, heathen sailors who don't know anything, but who have not been wrong this entire story. Verse 16. The men feared the Lord even more, as we know, and I imagine they very carefully rowed back to land. They just turned around and we're going back home. And offered a sacrifice to the Lord Yahweh and made vows. They don't know anything else. They don't know all the details, but they have experienced the hand of God, and they are going to respond appropriately. Because when you see this, this is what you need to do. I don't think that we always, I think sometimes we're a little more like Jonah than we want to be, and not like these pagan sailors. But we should take an example from them. With that, Mr. Larry, would you like to close us in prayer?